The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
Sue Gordon is a former Principal Deputy Director of Intelligence. Of course, she is also a SIG principal. So she brings her big thinking abilities to play when we're sort of, looking at the cyber landscape more broadly and trying to figure out where we're going to put our focus and who the most important people are to talk to. Sue, welcome.
Hey, what great conversations.
Thank you. I wish I could take credit for them, but of course they
No,
have been.
They really, really have been thoughtful.
Yeah.
Anyway, so great to see you. Thanks for doing this. I think about cyber all the time, and I think what's so interesting about it is it feels like a minute ago it was the purview of just a couple nation states executed kind of in a wild west outside of the view of most. And then it transitions through kind of being a technical thing. And now what you're seeing is that it's just totally integrated into every intention of allies, adversaries, and competitors. And it's that tool of intention in all its forms that I think makes it really interesting. And your conversation today has been fantastic on that front. So what are we going to talk about?
So I wanted to get your thoughts on a couple of these issues. And then the one big issue, which you and I talked about previously, which was sort of what we've seen happen in cyberspace after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with all of these private sector companies being able to bring their resources to bear, against what was happening there. And we heard this morning from Rob Joyce, who you know well and have worked with multiple times over the years.
Aren't we lucky as a country to have Rob? I'm just saying.
He's great. And it was really insightful. But, he's kind of warning. He's saying, hey, this is wonderful on one hand because we need private sector companies to open up what they have. But it should never bleed over into these white hat hackers who just kind of go vigilante on us and actually can end up, even though they don't intend to, doing more harm than good. Right. So let's tackle that topic first and let's see where it leads us.
Okay.
What do you think?
So like macro, it is a good thing that the public and the private sector have figured out that they actually care about national security, that they are part of the threat surface, and that they are national and global security decision makers. So I think that's a good trend. Companies deciding that they are going to stop doing business in Russia, which they can't be directed to do, and yet you saw a lot of major corporations at great financial hit making that decision. And I think that's a really good trend. I'm going to say, and this is a slippery slope, but I think it's a really good analog to what we see here is back in the middle of the election when there was so much disinformation and the US government hadn't yet figured out, and we're still figuring it out, how we want to handle disinformation and how we want to put some sort of organizational leadership, cultural structure around this. You did see the private sector step into the fray and say, okay, we own some platforms, we're going to decide what we're going to do. Now, you can look at those early efforts of kicking people off of their platform as being a bit of a slippery slope, but I still am going to say this notion that we are all now figuring out that what is unique about cyber is that it crosses boundaries that we used to understand and now we don't. And so I like in general we'll get to the activism, but I like the interest and I like the recognition that they have something to do. And then secondarily, and there's a big but coming, secondarily, I think what's so interesting about Ukraine is just the role that open source information has provided. Absolutely. Right? And so how that has been useful, how it has been made available, and in some ways been made available directly to the Ukrainians without going through a cutout, which I hope will inspire the government to figure out how to use it even more broadly because it does have real value. Yeah. So yay, all that, really good thing. If you've if you're going to say, would I rather have involvement than no involvement, I'm going to say, yes, I'd rather have involvement. Now, let's talk about some of the downsides. And I'm going to get to cyber hacktivism, but I'm going to start with even open source information is an interesting kind of conundrum, because we are actually providing tremendous open source information directly to forces that don't really have the infrastructure to know how to use it.
That's a great
right?
point.
Right. And so, and what the limits of that and how accurate it is. And if you use it for targeting and what that means about what you could damage because you just don't understand the limitations of that. And so even with that, that I think is so great, there is some sophistication that's going to have to come into how open source is used, because there is a craft to it more than just being data. So hacktivism, like, I love it when it helps the populace figure out how to get around censorship. I think that's great. But I will say the challenge of cyberspace in general, and actually the nation and national security has wrestled this for a long time, is how do you balance action in a domain that is also necessary for communications?
Oh, yes.
Right. So if you start trooping in, deciding that you're gonna, this is a technical term, dork up what somebody else is trying to do, the potential to do damage to a pathway that was going to be used for good purpose exists, and you just don't see it. So one of the challenges with cyber is you have activity going on that you both want to stop and want to allow. Right? I want to allow us to be able to operate in the digital environment to achieve the outcome we want, and I want to stop bad action. And the insight it takes to know which you're doing is not easy, because you're not seeing it physically in the same way. So I love the inspiration. It sounds really good, but I'm kind of with Rob on this one. And it's in part because we don't totally know the coupling effects of any offensive action, because we don't totally know how systems are designed. And so the potential for both ruining a communications pathway that you intended for a different purpose, or committing fratricide with somebody else who's trying to do something for the same purpose, is really remarkable. So I like it. I would say that I would rather have those really talented people be focused on bug bounty programs to find vulnerabilities in our networks of our critical infrastructure so that we can patch them, than I would like them out there trying to achieve a purposeful effect, when achieving purposeful effect typically requires more than the ability to actually just get on a network and do something.
But let's be real. I mean,
I'm really sorry.
A lot of these hacktivists, I mean, they and you know, I'm going to talk again about intentions. Like, they get emotionally charged up, like so many of us did as we were watching sort of what was happening in Ukraine and what was happening to the people there. So of course they want to, you know, kind of throw in what they think they have and help. However, I do also think that the ability of a lot of these companies to help has been hugely helpful in opening up, as you said, which are two obviously very different things. It's just difficult, you know, and what you mentioned with the bug bounty programs, trying to get them to sort of direct their talents that direction. You don't have the emotion. I mean, it's very difficult to make cyber sexy. You just don't have that emotional component. Yes, like, so how do we get our heads around where we actually need to be sort of channeling this talent and get people excited about, you know, addressing and finding solutions to the problems that we have?
So I think it's continuing to go down the path that I think this administration has made a great start on, but there's still real headway that needs to be made, and that is, I swear I'd never say these words again because it's gotten so hackneyed. Public-private partnership. There are a lot of private citizens and private companies that have remarkable insight and remarkable ability to do things, and they want to do things. One of the things that will help is if the government figures out that it actually is a partnership, and a partnership in 2022 isn't, thank you very much, we'll take your data and then we'll take it from here. Right? That just,
Yeah.
right, that isn't as satisfying, especially with a partner that has, in many cases, considerable access. So I think part of the solution to this energy issue, and you know me, Suzanne, I always feel like the government has more ability to go further, right? Is if it opens up, then more space gets open up. Is to continue to have real conversations and real partnership. Listen to some of these that have real ability to find ways to use it. Because, and this is just a problem of the modern world. It used to be that the government had really all the special capabilities and was the first one using it. Now, unfortunately, we have an installed base and the private sector has the ability to kind of blow by us, get in the same space and do some things. And so that movement will happen. Open source information will be made available. It will be provided to international users who now have figured out that, and people have the ability to do what they perceive to do, they will try to do. So our choice as a nation is to say, okay, how am I going to harness it, not how am I going to try and stop it? How am I going to try and channel it, not how am I going to try and control it? And I think that's just a continued evolution. There are, you know, I know Chris Inglis, I know Jen Easterly, I know Ann Neuberger, all are really trying hard on this. I just think it's more distance to travel. We're still too government centric rather than saying, oh, no, it really is a collective. And I'm going to listen to what they have more than try and say, don't do that, even though they should not act on their own, because man, fratricide is really a problem.
Yeah. So now that you're in the private sector with such incredibly deep knowledge of the government and how it works and all, you know, the words and the beautiful side of it as well, how are you telling companies, I mean, when you're advising people on the ways to best work with government when it comes to a lot of the issues that we talked about today, whether, you know, it's the introducing new technology, it's sharing information faster. I mean, a lot of these companies, you were the one who was down at the threat conference in Ireland, the Cipher Brief threat conference a couple of years ago, saying, hey guys, like the model is no longer what it was in the 1950s. Government is not in the lead, the private sector is. Flesh that out for me a little bit more. What are you telling private companies about how to engage more effectively with government?
Yes.
So I think someone has their mic open.
Yeah, I think so. Hey, Brad, if you're on, I think we've got some folks getting ready to join for the next session, but we might want to just make sure those folks are muted. Well, they have to save their opportunity to share their wisdom with us.
Or if they can answer the question, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, there you go. An easy one.
So let's break it down a little bit. I think the first thing that I really advise on, and I believe this, and I think it's coming along, is feel a responsibility for the environment in which you are being successful. Right there, all these companies and all these individuals have benefited from free and open societies. Let's make sure that that isn't undermined. So number one is feel that responsibility, and I think you're sensing it. And I think there are a lot of good things going on. I think the sharing of more information from the government is a really good move on that front. But we need the companies to feel it and then recognize that they're part of an ecosystem as well. And so my first step is understand the part of it. Number two is understand what part you play. What is your importance to national security? A lot of the importance of these companies is that you are incredibly successful and have the ability to be a global leader, that you protect your infrastructure, that you protect your intellectual property, that you understand how decisions are made, that you understand who you're allowing into your decision tree, that you're thinking about the people you're doing business with, you're thinking about when you make choices for the sake of efficiency or for the sake of profits, what have you given away that in time of crisis we're going to need to call back? So I think that's where I always start on that. And then the second is, I first want you to feel responsible. I first want you to be successful at your business in that context. You're the only one that can do it. I love the government help setting standards and framework, but the over-regulation of industry will be problematic for growth. So I need the industries to be thinking about how they act responsibly. And then I think the last thing I'd say is keep working with the government. You know, I hear horror stories of people who are victims of ransomware attacks.
Yeah.
Whose own advisors recommend that they don't call the FBI or don't. I cannot tell you what a myth that is in terms of you are not giving away your decision authority when you contact CISR or the FBI about these things. You are opening up access to more information. And if you just look at the past year alone, the advances that we have made in order chasing things down. So I know that the government is pesky because we're slow and we have to be fair, transparent, and all those things. But there is real benefit in this situation of working with your government because you are an individual in many cases going against nation states. And if you don't involve your nation state in that, it's going to be an unfair fight. So know you're responsible, know the role you're playing, understand the risks that you are presented with by threat actors. Prepare yourself. There is lots of data to tell you how to prepare yourself.
Yeah.
Then don't be an independent actor because the government really is trying to get to this combined effect.
Yeah. I want to kind of go broad again for just a moment and ask you, you were one of the people I was thinking about top of mind 3 months ago now, as we were watching what was happening in Ukraine and thinking big picture about what this means. And then we saw, within the first couple of days that there were companies sort of making decisions either not to do business there, like, you mentioned, or companies that were opening up the software that they had and offering it to kind of deal with this. I wonder, Sue, because I know you think this way, you are already projecting forward about what all this is going to mean in the future and how this is going to change the landscape when it comes to conflict. I just want to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that I actually think that there will be some really good lessons learned and hopefully applied out of this. I don't think there are any of the ones that people are talking about now necessarily. In terms of preparedness action, I think we're learning a lot about how cyber is going to be used. I think we're seeing it, and don't hold me to this, but I see it being used much more like chemical warfare as a tactical activity than like biological warfare, which is a much more strategic play. If you look at how it was used in Ukraine in early days, kind of broad brush, creating havoc, there was a lot of cyber activity, but it was mindful of the point I made earlier about you need to not wreck the space because you're going to have to use the space. You don't want to create so much physical effect that you incite physical effect. And so I think you're seeing kind of how cyber is going to be used in warfare. I do think there's an outstanding question about what are the lessons being learned by others who have designs on making physical moves on another territory. And one of the lessons I might take is Putin miscalculated when he went in halfway. Now, he may have chosen to go in halfway because he wanted no part of the US. But if I'm someone else looking at this, I'm saying I'm not going to move until I'm going to totally commit. And if I decide I'm going to go with everything I have. I hope that doesn't mean nuclear. But if you change your mindset to say, no, I'm not going to get in a dragged out thing. I'm going to move completely. And I have decided I'm going to do that, even with the risk of drawing the US in. I think you might see more capabilities used earlier that have bigger effect. And in that case, you could see a shift in terms of how cyber were used against to create, to create physical effect, not just create havoc in the information space. So I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting dissection. That's a horrible word, about a tragedy of massive proportion for me to say that it's interesting. But there is a lot of work to be done in terms of understanding what we saw, and understanding how that might be used by others. Who might do that. I think we learned that just like we assessed Russian success based on the capability of their weapons inventory, not on their ability to put it into practice. I think the same thing may be true in cyber, where, man, the Russians certainly have every tool in the book they need, but putting it into practice is a different place. So I think we're going to learn a little bit about how to think about capability and use as not one and the same when you assess outcome. So I don't know that I have any great revelation, but I do think there are a lot of pieces to this that will be useful to assess and then build a new model, not just think that what we saw here is going to be the playbook in a different place. I think it's going to be, oh my God, look how it played out. Now, what would somebody else with that same intent do with it? And so that's a little far afield from your question about hacktivism, but I will say the private sector isn't going away as an actor, and that there's good stuff about that, and we've got to figure out how to use it a little bit more effectively as well.
As an actor for good. One of the other issues, Sue, that has come up repeatedly today is understanding cyber at the board level, and it's kind of funny in a way because it's so basic, and frankly it's something that we have talked about for years. So my big question to you, why are we still talking about it, and why has the conversation not changed? Why are particularly, I'm guessing there are some companies that still just don't understand it, and that's why we're still talking about it.
God, so many levels. Number one, it's cost. It's overhead. Number one, and if you so if you think the solution to cybersecurity is to buy more cybersecurity, you will never have enough money, and you will start looking about how much do I have to spend. So there's one, just it's overhead. Two is it's still thought of as technical, right? And so if I have a good CISO, I'm good. And I will tell you, you should have a good CISO. But that isn't enough, because there's a compliance kind of side to this. And then there's the cognitive side that says, okay, what's my risk? What's my risk tolerance? How do I reevaluate that continuously? And I think because we're still thinking that it's a technical thing, we turn it over to the technical people. I think this is something that can be done at the board level. And I think the last one is just really human nature. Yeah, that's happening to somebody else. And I will say this again to everybody. In 2022, you are the target or you are the transportation.
Oh.
And in both those domains, you do not want to be responsible for an effect on the other parts of the ecosystem simply because you didn't recognize that you were part of an end-to-end chain. So target or transportation, you're one of the two, get together with it. And then I think we could have a really interesting conversation. I think the cyber insurance industry is due for a total refresh. You need the ability for insurers to also be able to help companies understand how they become better protected, not just offer the money. So I think that can help us some too. And you and I have talked on other fora where I do think the government, and we may be moving in this direction, can specify kind of a minimum level of cybersecurity, and then do it like we do audit, those sorts of things. But first, it starts with knowing that it's going to happen to you, and are you prepared, and are you leaving it to your technical people? Anyway, I don't know. I just Don't know, but
So just
I would say for all the people listening to this, I will tell you, it was only a year and a half ago that I went with a password manager. So all these words that I say,
okay, yeah.
right? So there are a
Yeah.
lot of things that even into, it's all fun and games to talk about what somebody else should be doing. But how many of us who talk about this, are we using password managers? Do we have multi-factor authentication? Do we always use a VPN, or are we logging into the hotel thing?
Yeah.
There's just a number of things, and take those individual choices that we're all making and then just bounce them into a company, and you don't understand why it's hard to do.
No,
But
you make it sound so easy. I love it. You make everything sound so easy.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So
Now,
thank
this
you
is
so
a really good topic. I would say that I'm really excited about the sophistication of the conversation we're having. I was really excited about the articles about the role of the private sector that are being written in this conversation. No more going la, 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 so this isn't happening. So from the range of cyber activity that is causing problems, to the kinds of things being done, to the use of open information. These are really important conversations to have. So I'm kind of hopeful that we're getting out of the just having hearing after hearing about how much of this is a problem, and actually getting into the nitty-gritty in terms of how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking, I know you are like jet setting all over the world these days, offering your advice to companies and businesses and boards. And we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today, and for being a part of this really formative group of the SIG principals.
No, I love this. I love the SIG. I think it'll make a difference. I think the members from Glenn to Kelly to Keith, to every single one, this has the potential to be one of those voices that can take these two sectors and bring them together. So best part of my day is always listening to the people that you bring together. Thanks, Suzanne.
Wow, I love listening to you. Thank you so much, Sue Gordon, for joining. Nice to see you again.
As well.